bustling interstellar market of Zarnak was a riot of colors and sounds, where merchants from across the galaxies hawked their wares with voices as varied as the goods they sold. Jack, with his keen human curiosity and a burgeoning career in exotic trades, maneuvered through the crowd, his eyes scanning for unique artifacts. "Careful, young man!" a gruff voice bellowed as Jack accidentally bumped into a stall laden with glittering minerals. He turned to see a towering Yirith, his skin a deep blue and eyes twinkling with a mix of annoyance and amusement. "Sorry about that. Got a bit carried away," Jack apologized, riding a displaced mineral that sparkled under the market lights. The Yirith merchant, Varnu, grunted, his initial irritation softening as he examined Jack's genuine interest in his collection. "Not many humans wander into this corner of the market. What brings you here?" Jack's response was eager, his youthful energy evident. "I'm always on the lookout for something extraordinary. And this," he said, picking up a luminescent stone, "certainly fits the bill." Varnu laughed, the sound echoing around his stall. "That, my boy, is a Gillian crystal. Powers the engines of starships and the dreams of collectors. Rare, expensive, and powerful. Just like my daughter," he joked, never one to miss a chance to brag a little. "Your daughter?" Jack echoed, intrigued by the merchant's blend of pride and jest. "Yes, Sareth. She knows more about these crystals than anyone else in the sector. I often say that winning her favor is as complex as understanding these stones." Varnu's eyes shone with challenge. Jack smiled, driven by both the challenge and the hint of potential adventure. "Maybe I'll manage both," he quipped, enjoying the game. Over the next few hours, Jack and Varnu engaged in spirited haggling mixed with stories of their respective travels and trades. Jack learned about the nuances of the minerals, and Varnu shared tales of Sareth's exploits in galactic academia and her contributions to their family business. As the market's artificial sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the stalls, Varnu invited Jack to a meal, a customary gesture of friendship among the Yirith. They moved to a nearby eatery, a place humming with alien dialects and the clatter of utensils. As they sat, a figure approached their table, a female Yirith, her presence commanding yet graceful. "Father, you left the stall early," she said, her voice a melodious contrast to Varnu's booming baritone. "Sareth, meet Jack," Varnu introduced, "a human who thinks he can master the secrets of the Gillian crystal." Sareth's gaze met Jack's, her eyes reflecting a mix of skepticism and curiosity. "Is that so?" she asked, her tone teasing. "And how do you plan to accomplish that?" Jack, undeterred and enchanted by the intellectual gauntlet thrown down, responded with a grin. "Perhaps with the right teacher, I could learn anything." The conversation flowed like the spicy Zarnakian stew they shared, rich and full of surprises. Sareth proved to be as knowledgeable as her father boasted, and more importantly, willing to delve into discussions about culture, science, and the mysteries of the universe. As the meal ended and they parted ways, Jack felt a connection that went beyond the transactional relationships he was used to in his trade. There was a promise of something greater, a potential for learning and growth that extended beyond simple commerce. Varnu clapped Jack on the back as they said their goodbyes. "You've made an impression, human. Let's see if you can keep up with my daughter." Jack watched Sareth and Varnu depart, his mind already racing with possibilities. This unexpected encounter might just have set him on a path that could redefine his understanding of the galaxy and his place within it. Chapter 2. A Curious Proposition. After their initial meeting, Jack found himself drawn back to the interstellar market of Zarnak with an eagerness he hadn't felt in years. He spent the next few days researching Yirith culture and their renowned expertise in mineralogy, hoping to impress Sareth with his dedication. Upon his return to Varnu's stall, he was greeted by the sight of Sareth meticulously cataloging a new shipment of artifacts. She looked up, her expression shifting to one of mild surprise as she noticed Jack. "Back so soon?" Sareth asked, a playful edge to her voice. "I hope you're not just here to charm my father with your human wiles." Jack chuckled, holding up a data pad filled with notes. "Actually, I've been studying up. I thought maybe you could test me, see if I'm getting a handle on your culture. Intrigued, Sareth set aside her work. All right, let's see what you've learned. They spent the next hour discussing various Yirith customs, Jack answering Sareth's questions with a mix of earnestness and educated guesses. His efforts seemed to amuse Sareth, who corrected his mistakes with a patience that only piqued his interest further. As they talked, Varnu watched them from the back of the stall, his eyes twinkling with unspoken thoughts. Eventually, he joined the conversation, bringing with him a rare artifact. A small, intricately carved orb that seemed to pulse with an inner light. This, Varnu said, placing the orb between them, is the Elam crystal. It's said to be able to store the essence of our most ancient songs and stories. Understanding it, however, has eluded many who have tried. Jack's eyes widened at the challenge. And you think I can crack its secrets? Sareth smirked. Maybe with some help. Consider it a collaborative project. If you're serious about learning, this will be your final exam. Accepting the challenge, Jack and Sareth began to work closely together. They spent days in Varnu's archive, poring over old texts and experimenting with the crystal. During this time, Jack learned not only about the crystal but also about Sareth's own passions and fears. One evening, as they were alone in the archive, Jack turned to Sareth, his expression serious. I've been wondering what made you decide to bring me into this. It's clear this project means a lot to you. Sareth paused, her fingers tracing the lines of the crystal. I guess I saw something in you that first day, a genuine desire to understand, not just to acquire. And maybe, she hesitated, her voice softening. I wanted someone to see this side of my world. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the busy hum of the market outside faded into the background. Jack reached out, his hand brushing against hers, a gesture of comfort and connection. Thank you for trusting me with it, he said gently. As the days turned into weeks, their partnership strengthened into a tentative friendship, marked by shared discoveries and the occasional friendly debate. Their collaboration brought them closer, not just to solving the mystery of the Elam crystal, but to understanding each other's worlds. One day, after a particularly long session in the archive, Sareth invited Jack to join her for a walk through one of Zarnak's many gardens. As they walked under the glowing leaves of bioluminescent trees, Jack felt a sense of peace and possibility. Sareth suddenly stopped, turning to face him. Jack, regardless of what happens with the crystal, I'm glad you walked into our stall that day. Jack smiled, his heart lighter than it had been in years. So am I, Sareth. So am I. Their project was more than an academic pursuit. It was a bridge between two vastly different beings, drawn together by curiosity and sustained by mutual respect and burgeoning affection. Chapter 3, Learning the Lines. Over the next several weeks, Jack and Sareth's collaboration deepened, becoming less about the Elam crystal and more about understanding each other's perspectives. Jack spent nearly every day at Varnu's stall or in the Yirith archives. The two were no longer just partners in research. They were friends, teasing one another, exchanging ideas, and sharing small but significant pieces of their lives. Their favorite spot quickly became the quiet rear chamber of the archives, where shelves stacked high with ancient Yirith texts cast long, slanted shadows in the late afternoon light. They would sit on the floor surrounded by old data tablets, animatedly discussing their discoveries. This line here, Sareth said one afternoon, pointing to a complex Yirith glyph on her tablet, is supposed to represent unity between two opposing forces. But what I find fascinating is how the symbols never truly merge. They run parallel, close, but always distinct. Jack leaned closer, his brow furrowing as he tried to parse the alien script. It's almost poetic, like two different people working side by side, complementing each other without losing who they are. Sareth glanced at him, her expression softening. That's a rather elegant interpretation. Jack chuckled. Thanks, but it's probably wrong. I'm still struggling with the basics here. I can barely pronounce the word for peace without sounding like I'm choking. You're getting better, Sareth said encouragingly, giving his shoulder a quick pat. Not quite ready for a public speech yet, but you've got the enthusiasm. Enthusiasm doesn't help when I keep mixing up the terms for sunlight and serenity. The Yirith language is all about subtle nuances. One wrong syllable, and I'm asking for a cup of soup instead of describing a celestial event. Well, maybe you can bring me soup next time, she teased, flashing a rare smile. But you're right, the language is intricate. Yirith philosophy is woven into it, which makes it tough to separate words from meaning. Jack rested his elbows on his knees, gazing at the glyph. It's beautiful, though. Your culture's approach to communication is so layered. Every phrase feels like it carries a story. Sereth nodded, her gaze distant. It's why I became an archivist. I wanted to preserve those stories. Make sure our history wasn't just a series of artifacts collecting dust. There was a moment of quiet as the two sat surrounded by the hum of the archive's ventilation system and the faint rustle of old documents being indexed by automated drones. Jack hesitated before speaking again. Sereth, why do you trust me with all this? He asked, his voice softer now. You didn't have to let me in on your work, your culture. I'm just another trader passing through, but you've shared so much. She tilted her head, considering the question. I'm not sure, honestly. Maybe it's because you don't pretend to know everything. You're curious, but you respect the boundaries. You don't take shortcuts. You actually want to understand. Jack nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and determination. I do. I really do. I want to learn about the language, the artifacts, your world. And I want to get it right. Sereth smiled faintly. That's why I trust you, Jack. Because you want to get it right, even when it's hard. Their conversation shifted back to the glyphs, with Sereth explaining their historical context and Jack attempting to sketch the shapes on his tablet. She corrected him gently, guiding his hand over the lines until he could replicate them more accurately. Each mistake brought a chuckle, each improvement a word of praise. By the end of the day, Jack felt both exhausted and exhilarated. He'd spent hours immersed in a completely alien culture, learning not just words but the philosophies and histories that gave them meaning. Sereth's patience and humor made the challenges bearable, and the satisfaction of each small success pushed him forward. All right, Sereth said, standing and stretching. We've done enough damage for one day. Let's pack up. Jack stood as well, stifling a groan as his legs protested from sitting too long. I think I'll be seeing glyphs in my sleep. Good. That means you're starting to absorb them, Sereth replied, a glint of amusement in her eyes. Just don't start sleepwalking and rearranging the archive. No promises, Jack said with a grin. As they left the archives and stepped into the cool evening air, Sereth stopped and turned to him. Jack, you've come a long way since that first day in the market. I think you're ready to tackle something a little more complex next time. He raised an eyebrow. Oh, you mean that wasn't complex? Consider it a warm-up, she said with a smirk. But don't worry, I'll be here to help you through it. Jack smiled, a feeling of gratitude swelling in his chest. Thanks, Sereth. I'll do my best. I know you will, she replied, then added with a playful tone. And try not to mix up sunlight and serenity again, okay? Understood, Jack said, laughing. No soup, just celestial events. They parted ways, and Jack felt a newfound determination. This wasn't just about impressing Sereth or mastering a new skill. It was about exploring a world unlike his own, building something meaningful, and discovering what lay beyond the boundaries he'd always known. Chapter 4. The Gala of Galaxies. The Gala of Galaxies was a grand affair, a gathering of diplomats, scientists, and traders from across the known universe. Held in a vast, dome structure on the neutral space station known as Valoris Prime, it was a spectacle of cultural exchange and diplomatic negotiation. For Jack, however, it was another opportunity to spend time with Sereth, albeit in a much more formal setting. Are you sure we're ready for this? Jack asked as they stood at the edge of the main hall. Sereth, wearing traditional Yirith ceremonial attire that gleamed softly under the hall's biolights, glanced at him with a small smile. We've prepared as much as we can, she said. The rest will come down to how we present ourselves. Just remember what we practiced. Jack adjusted his collar nervously. His role was to support Sereth in presenting the significance of the alum crystal to an audience of dignitaries and experts, many of whom had their own interpretations of the artifact's value. Their task was not only to argue for its historical importance, but also to show how understanding it could foster greater cooperation among species. As they entered the hall, the din of overlapping conversations ebbed slightly. Jack and Sereth made their way to the central podium, their every step drawing curious glances. The Yirith were respected for their deep knowledge of ancient artifacts, but few had ever collaborated so closely with a human. Jack could feel the weight of that scrutiny, but he drew strength from Sereth's calm demeanor. At the podium, Sereth began to speak, her voice steady and melodic. She outlined the known history of the alum crystal, its potential uses, and the cultural significance it held for her people. Jack followed her lead, adding details about their joint research, emphasizing the ways their partnership had uncovered insights neither could have achieved alone. When they finished, the room was silent for a moment. Then a murmur spread through the crowd. Questions followed, some skeptical, others intrigued. Jack and Sereth fielded them together, each playing to their strengths. Jack handled the practical applications, Sereth the philosophical implications. The two of them flowed like a well-rehearsed team, their chemistry evident even to the most jaded observers. By the end of the session, the mood had shifted. Their presentation was met with nods of approval and even a few compliments from seasoned academics. As they stepped down from the podium, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "You were amazing up there," he said, glancing at Sereth as they moved away from the crowd. "You made it all seem so natural." Sereth tilted her head, her eyes bright. "You weren't so bad yourself. I could tell they respected what you brought to the table." Jack laughed. "I was just trying not to trip over my words." "You didn't. You held your own," Sereth replied, her voice warm. "You're starting to understand more than just the surface of this work." They found a quiet balcony overlooking the luminous swirl of a nebula far in the distance. The stars cast a soft glow on their faces as they stood side by side, the tension of the presentation easing into a comfortable silence. Jack leaned on the railing, looking out at the endless expanse of space. "I never thought I'd be here doing this. When I first came to Zarnak, I was just looking for something rare to trade. Now you're learning that some things can't be traded," Sereth finished, her voice low but certain. "You've invested more than time. You've put in thought, effort, and care." Jack turned to her, his expression earnest. "It's because you've shown me it's worth it. I would have given up a long time ago if it wasn't for you." Sereth's gaze softened, and she reached out, her fingers brushing against Jack's hand. "You've changed the way I see this work too. It's not just about preserving history anymore. It's about building something new, together." For a moment, the vastness of the universe seemed to shrink, leaving only the two of them on that balcony. Jack hesitated, then turned his hand to meet hers fully. Sereth didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, her expression both curious and inviting. Their first kiss was hesitant, a tentative step into uncharted territory. Jack felt the slight warmth of her skin against his, the unfamiliar but not unwelcome sensation of her alien features. It wasn't like kissing another human. There were subtle differences, the texture of her lips, the angle of her movements, but it felt just as genuine, just as meaningful. When they parted, Sereth smiled faintly. "You're full of surprises, Jack. Guess I still have a lot to learn," he replied, his voice light, but his heart racing. "Good. I like teaching you," Sereth said with a teasing edge. She took a step back, though her hand lingered in his for a moment longer. "Now let's get back inside. The gala's not over yet." Jack nodded, and as they walked back into the grand hall, he couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet triumph. It wasn't just about their presentation or even the discoveries they'd made. It was about the bond they'd forged, the understanding they'd reached. Together, they were no longer just representatives of their species. They were partners, moving forward into a future as unpredictable and boundless as the galaxy itself. Chapter 5. Cultural crossroads. The days after the gala were busy, as Jack and Sereth found themselves fielding questions and invitations from dignitaries who had seen their presentation. While Sereth remained calm and composed through it all, Jack was still adjusting to the sudden attention. "I think I've answered the same question about the crystal at least 5 times today," Jack said, his voice laced with exhaustion. He leaned against the archive desk, rubbing his temples. Sereth handed him a steaming cup of Yrith tea. "It's part of the process. People are just starting to understand what we've been working on. It's natural that they have questions." Jack took the cup gratefully, though he gave her a half-smile. "Natural or not, I'm not used to this level of scrutiny." Sereth sat beside him, her posture relaxed. "You're handling it better than you think. You haven't snapped at anyone yet." "Yet?" Jack echoed with a faint grin. He sipped the tea, its earthy aroma soothing his nerves. "I just didn't expect all this attention. I was a nobody when I first landed on Zarnak. Now I'm still a nobody, but apparently a nobody who knows a thing or two about Yrith artifacts." "You're more than that," Sereth said quietly. She met his gaze, her expression earnest. "You've proven you're willing to understand, to adapt. That's something not everyone can do." Jack felt a warmth in her words, one that made his usual jokes and deflections feel unnecessary. "I couldn't have done it without you," he admitted. "You've been patient, even when I butchered your language or got the history completely wrong. I'm not sure I would have stuck it out if our roles were reversed." Sereth tilted her head thoughtfully. "Maybe, but the effort was still yours. I just pointed the way." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping tea and letting the bustling archive fade into the background. Finally, Sereth set her cup down and gave Jack a look he recognized as the start of a new challenge. "Since you've gotten more comfortable with our language and history," she began, "I think it's time we talk about something deeper, our traditions around bonding and partnership." Jack raised an eyebrow. "Bonding and partnership? Like marriage?" "Not exactly," Sereth said, though she smiled at his directness. "The Yrith don't approach relationships the same way humans do. We don't have a single ceremony that binds 2 people together for life. Instead, we have a series of rituals that represent different stages of trust and commitment." "Rituals," Jack repeated. "Sounds complicated." "It's not meant to be," Sereth explained. "Each ritual is a step forward, a way to show both people that they're ready for the next phase of their relationship. They're not set in stone either. Some couples skip steps, others take longer. It's all about what feels right." Jack thought about it, trying to imagine what those rituals might look like. "And what if one person isn't Yrith? Does that make a difference?" Sereth hesitated, her gaze dropping for a moment. "It can. Some rituals are tied to our physiology, our energy patterns. But others are more symbolic, things anyone can participate in, as long as they understand their meaning." Jack set his cup down, leaning forward slightly. "I'd like to learn more about them, even if it's just to understand your culture better." Sereth looked up, her expression softening. "You really mean that?" "Of course," Jack said, his voice steady. "If I'm going to keep working with you, and I hope I am, I want to understand everything. Not just the artifacts, but the people, the customs, the connections that matter to you." For a moment, Sereth said nothing. Then she reached out, placing her hand gently on Jack's. "I'll teach you, but be warned. Some of these rituals might seem strange to you." Jack's lips quirked into a smile. "Strange is fine. I'm used to strange by now." She chuckled softly. "All right then, we'll start with the most basic one. It's called Viral Vesh, which translates roughly to sharing breath. It's a simple act. 2 people stand close and breathe in sync for a few moments. It's a way of acknowledging trust and mutual respect." Jack blinked, caught off guard. "Breathing in sync? That's different." "Different, but meaningful," Sereth said. "It's not about the action itself. It's about taking a moment to focus solely on each other, to feel the same rhythm." "All right," Jack said, a little uncertain but intrigued. "I'll give it a try." Sereth stood and stepped closer, and Jack rose to meet her. She showed him how to stand, her movements deliberate but gentle, and they faced each other. Their breathing began to fall into a natural rhythm, inhale, exhale, inhale. Jack could feel the subtle warmth of her presence, the quiet connection forming between them. It only lasted a minute, maybe two, but when they stepped apart, something had shifted. Jack felt more attuned to Sereth, as if he had taken a small but significant step into her world. Sereth smiled, her voice light. "That's the first ritual. How did it feel?" Jack smiled back. "It felt like I was learning something important." "You were," Sereth said. "And there's more to learn if you're willing." Jack nodded. "I'm willing. Let's see where this goes." Chapter 6. The Rising Storm. Jack and Sereth's collaboration had grown into something much more. It wasn't just their work on the alum crystal that bound them. It was the time spent together, the shared jokes, and the gradual understanding of each other's worlds. But not everyone in Zarnak's bustling market saw their partnership as a positive development. "Jack," Sereth said one morning as they arrived at her father's stall, "there's been some talk." Her voice was calm, but there was a weight behind her words. "Talk?" Jack raised an eyebrow, sensing something serious in her tone. "What kind of talk?" "Some of the older merchants have been saying you're taking advantage of our traditions," she explained. "They claim you're using what you've learned for personal gain, not mutual understanding." Jack blinked, taken aback. "That's not true. I've worked hard to learn and respect your culture." "I would never." "I know," Sereth interrupted, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. "I know you've been honest, Jack, but they don't see it that way. They think a human digging so deeply into our heritage must have ulterior motives." Jack ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident on his face. "So what do we do? How do we prove I'm not out to exploit anyone?" Before Sereth could answer, Varnu joined them. The old Yirith merchant's expression was unusually stern. "Jack," he began, "you have to understand that our traditions have been guarded for centuries. Even if your intentions are pure, the mere act of you studying them so closely is enough to make some people uneasy." "I get that," Jack said, his tone edged with frustration. "But what's the alternative? Should I just stop learning about your culture because some people don't trust me?" Varnu looked at Sereth, then back at Jack. "No. Stopping now would only confirm their suspicions. You need to show them that your actions are genuine. Something beyond words." Sereth spoke up, her voice steady. "There's a tradition, one that can demonstrate sincerity. It's called the Viren Pact. 2 people, one Yirith and one outsider, work together to restore or preserve something of cultural importance. It's a public display of trust." Jack straightened, his expression firm. "Let's do it. What do I have to do?" Varnu nodded slowly. "It's not an easy task. The Viren Pact is symbolic. You and Sereth will need to choose something meaningful, an artifact, a piece of history, and present it in a way that proves your dedication." Sereth turned to Jack. "There's a set of ancient Yirith star charts that have been damaged over the centuries. They're not just maps. They're stories, records of how our people viewed the galaxy long ago. Restoring them would be a powerful gesture." Jack nodded. "All right, let's get to work." The following weeks were spent in the archives and Varnu's workshop. Jack and Sereth pored over the delicate star charts, carefully cleaning and repairing them under Varnu's watchful eye. The work was meticulous. One wrong move and the fragile material could crumble. "Pass me the stabilizer gel," Sereth said one afternoon, holding out her hand. Jack handed her the small container, watching as she deftly applied it to a frayed corner of the chart. "You're really good at this," he said, impressed. "I've had practice," Sereth replied with a faint smile. "But you're catching on. You're a lot more careful now than you were when we started." Jack chuckled. "I learned my lesson after nearly destroying that first piece. I still can't believe you let me try again." Sereth glanced at him, her expression softening. "You wanted to try even after you messed up. That matters." Their hands brushed as she passed the chart back to him, and for a moment, they paused. The air between them felt charged, but neither said anything. Instead, They returned to their work, focusing on the intricate patterns that held centuries of Yirith history. As they made progress, word of their efforts began to spread. Other merchants, curious despite their initial skepticism, stopped by to watch or ask questions. The charts started to become a point of community interest. Even some of the elders who had voiced doubts began to acknowledge the care Jack put into the restoration. On the day of the presentation, Jack and Sareth stood before a small gathering in the central hall of the archives. The restored charts were displayed on a curved surface that replicated the night sky as seen from ancient Yirith colonies. As the charts lit up, the audience gasped, murmurs of amazement spreading through the crowd. Sareth stepped forward to explain the significance of the work. Her voice was clear and steady, weaving the history of the charts with the process they'd undertaken to bring them back to life. Jack stood by her side, occasionally chiming in to share his perspective as an outsider who had come to appreciate the deep meaning behind the artifacts. When they finished, there was a long silence before one of the elder merchants, a man who had been especially vocal in his criticism, stood and spoke. "You've shown us more than skill," he said slowly, his tone measured. "You've shown us that you care about preserving our heritage, not just for profit, but because it deserves to endure. For that, I thank you." Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He glanced at Sareth, who smiled faintly, her expression one of quiet pride. After the crowd dispersed, Varnu approached them. "Well done," he said simply. "You've shown them that your actions speak louder than words." Sareth turned to Jack. "You proved yourself today, not just to them but to me." Jack looked at her, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you." Sareth's smile deepened. "You did your part. That's all I needed to see." Chapter 7. The Harmony of Hearts. The following weeks brought a newfound calm to Jack and Sareth's lives. The restored star charts had not only proven their sincerity to the Yirith community, but also brought them closer together. They continued to spend most days in the archives, working on smaller restoration projects, but their time together had started to feel less like work and more like a shared journey. One morning, as they were reviewing a set of ancient navigational instruments, Jack noticed Sareth's focus wandering. Her usual sharp, steady movements seemed slower, and she kept glancing out the window at the glowing trees of the marketplace beyond. "You seem distracted," Jack remarked, setting down the delicate compass he'd been examining. "What's on your mind?" Sareth hesitated, her hands resting on the edge of the table. "It's nothing, just a lot has changed recently. With the charts, with the merchants, with us." Jack leaned against the table, crossing his arms. "It's not nothing if it's keeping you from your usual efficiency. Come on, talk to me." She smiled faintly at his persistence, then sighed. "Fine, it's just that for so long, I've worked alone on these projects. I never had to explain myself to anyone, never had to rely on someone else's input. Now you're here, and everything feels different. I'm trying to figure out if that's a good thing." Jack looked at her, his expression softening. "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Sareth said quickly, then caught herself. "I mean, no, that's not what I want. I think I'm still adjusting to having someone by my side." Jack considered this, then reached out to tap the ancient instrument between them. "Well, it's not like you're not still in charge. I mean, you've been teaching me since the start. I'm just the guy who fumbles through alien history while you roll your eyes." "You're more than that," Sareth said quietly, meeting his gaze. "You've become important to me." The words hung in the air, and Jack felt his pulse quicken. He smiled, trying to lighten the mood. "Important enough to get my own office?" Sareth chuckled, the tension breaking slightly. "Not that important." "Fair," Jack replied, his grin widening. "But seriously, if I'm making things harder for you, just say the word." "I'll..." "Stop," Sareth interrupted, stepping closer. "You're not making anything harder. If anything, you've made all of this more meaningful. I just didn't expect it." Jack looked down at the instrument in his hands, then back at her. "I didn't either. But I'm glad it happened." The moment lingered, and before either of them could overthink it, Sereth leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't hesitant or uncertain this time. It was deliberate, a silent acknowledgement of everything they had built together. When they broke apart, Sereth's cheeks darkened slightly, and she cleared her throat. So, should we get back to work? Jack grinned. Sure. But just so you know, I'm never going to let you live that down. She rolled her eyes but didn't hide her smile as she turned back to the instruments. Then I'll just have to keep you too busy to talk about it. That evening, Varnu stopped by the archive to see their progress. He glanced at the neatly restored instruments, then at Jack and Sereth. A knowing look crossed his face, but he didn't say anything. I see you've been making good use of your time, Varnu said, his tone light. I'm glad to see you two working so well together. Couldn't have done it without your teaching, Jack said, giving a polite nod. Varnu chuckled. And I couldn't have done it without Sereth. She's been my pride since the day she learned to read these charts faster than I could. Father, Sereth said, shaking her head. Don't embarrass me. Just speaking the truth, Varnu replied with a grin. Then he turned to Jack. It's good to have someone who values our traditions, even if they weren't born into them. I wasn't sure about you at first, but you've shown me that our ways can be understood by others. And that means more than you might realize. Jack nodded. Thank you, Varnu. That means a lot. Sereth gave her father a small smile. We'll keep doing our best. As Varnu left, Jack looked at Sereth. Think he's onto us? Onto what? Sereth asked, raising an eyebrow. You know, Jack said, leaning closer. Our stellar teamwork. Sereth rolled her eyes, though her smile lingered. Maybe, but as long as we're getting the work done, I don't think he'll mind. They returned to their tasks, but the air between them was lighter, filled with an unspoken understanding. They didn't need to say it aloud. What they had wasn't just about artifacts or research. It was about finding someone who saw the world and the stars the same way. Chapter 8. Amongst the Stars. The shuttle cabin was small but comfortable, designed more for function than aesthetics. Jack adjusted his seatbelt as the hum of the engines grew louder. Sereth was already strapped in beside him, calmly checking the navigational displays. The two of them had spent months preparing for this expedition, a joint mission to explore an uncharted sector of Yrith space. You sure you're ready for this? Sereth asked, her tone light but with an undercurrent of concern. Jack gave her a crooked grin. How many times are you going to ask that? Of course I'm ready. Sereth's lips quirked in a faint smile. Just making sure. Once we're out there, it's not like we can turn around and head back if you forget something. You've drilled every procedure into my head, Jack replied. If I forget anything, it's because I'm unconscious. Good to know, Sereth said with a chuckle. But I'll be holding you to that. The Yrith crew we're meeting isn't exactly known for their patience with outsiders. Jack's smile faded slightly. Yeah, I've been thinking about that. Are we going to be the only human Yrith team out there? As far as I know, Sereth admitted. It's a pretty unprecedented collaboration, but the others understand how important this mission is. They'll cooperate. I'll cooperate too, Jack said, as long as no one asks me to recite ancient Yrith poetry again. I'm still recovering from the last time. Sereth laughed, the sound lightening the tension in the cabin. I don't think that will come up. Just focus on the science and the navigation, and leave the cultural diplomacy to me. Jack nodded. Deal. But if they try to rope me into a cooking competition, I'm all in. I've been perfecting my Yrith-style stew recipe. Sereth shook her head with a smile. Jack, you're impossible. And you love it, he quipped, earning another laugh from her. Their conversation was interrupted by the ship's AI announcing that their destination was nearing. Sereth double-checked the star charts, ensuring their coordinates matched the Yrith exploration vessel's rendezvous point. All right, she said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. We're about to enter Yrith space. Keep comms open and follow my lead. Understood, Captain, Jack said, giving her a playful salute. Sereth rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her smile. Let's focus. We're about to make history. The Yirith exploration vessel was unlike anything Jack had seen before, sleek, organic in design, as if the ship itself had grown into its shape rather than been constructed. As they docked and boarded, Jack felt the weight of their mission settle on his shoulders. This was more than a personal journey. It was a chance to prove that humans and Yirith could work together on a grander scale. They were greeted by a group of Yirith scientists, their expressions reserved but not unfriendly. Sareth took the lead, exchanging the traditional Yirith greetings while Jack hung back, trying not to appear too eager or out of place. One of the Yirith, an older male with silver streaks across his skin, stepped forward and addressed Jack directly. "You must be the human Sareth spoke of," the scientist said, his voice deep and measured. "Jack, isn't it?" Jack nodded, offering a polite smile. "That's me. It's an honor to be here." The older Yirith regarded him for a moment, then nodded. "I hope your skills are as good as she claims. We'll be relying on you." "I won't let you down," Jack promised. The tension eased slightly as the group moved to the ship's main research chamber. The Yirith scientists explained the purpose of their mission, mapping uncharted systems, cataloging new celestial phenomena, and potentially identifying habitable worlds for future colonization. It was meticulous, time-consuming work, but Jack found himself more excited than daunted. As the days turned into weeks, Jack and Sareth settled into a rhythm with the Yirith crew. The initial wariness from the Yirith scientists began to fade as Jack proved himself through his technical skills and willingness to adapt to their procedures. Sareth's role as a cultural bridge was crucial. She smoothed over misunderstandings, explained Yirith customs to Jack, and highlighted Jack's contributions to the Yirith crew. One evening, after a particularly grueling day of data analysis, Jack and Sareth found themselves alone in the observation deck. The room was dark, save for the soft glow of the galaxy outside. The ship's hull offered a panoramic view of a nebula they had just scanned, its vibrant colors swirling in silence. "It's breathtaking," Jack said, leaning against the railing. "I don't think I'll ever get used to seeing this." "Neither will I," Sareth admitted. She stood beside him, her eyes fixed on the stars. "There's something humbling about it. No matter how much we learn, the universe always has more to show us." Jack glanced at her, taking in her profile illuminated by the nebula's light. "You know, I never thought I'd end up out here. When I first met you, I was just some guy looking for rare artifacts. And now you're a guy looking at rare nebulae," Sareth said, a teasing note in her voice. Jack chuckled. "I'm serious, though. Meeting you changed everything. I've learned so much, not just about your culture, but about myself, about what it means to truly connect with someone from a completely different world." Sareth turned to him, her expression soft. "You've taught me a lot too, Jack. You showed me that understanding doesn't have to be one-sided. It's something we build together." Jack smiled. "We've built something pretty amazing, haven't we?" "We have," Sareth agreed, her voice quiet. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "And there's still so much more to discover." As they stood there, hand in hand, the stars continued their silent dance. The journey they had begun together was far from over, but in that moment, they knew they would face whatever came next as a team.